Hi everyone, welcome to another exciting edition of Words, Images, and Worlds, an educator-centric edition. I am glad to finally put a face and voice with a name, and I'm talking with educator Jill Gerber on this episode. Jill, may I call you Jill?
Yes, please.
All right,
I'm glad to be here. I'm excited about the conversation.
as am I, as am I. I've been following your work on social media for several years now, and always delighted to talk to a fellow educator and comics advocate, comics evangelist, however one says that.
Yeah, I consider myself an evangelist of comics and just visual literacy, and uh, and just trying to get kids reading and
Yeah,
thinking and creating is a lot of what I see comics being a really good medium for.
yeah, yeah. That's usually why when folks are on, one of my first questions is like, what connected you with the written word? Because I feel like that's what we're constantly doing is trying to get kids to read and to find the right book that connects with them and all of those processes that are monumental work all in there. So how did you arrive at visual literacy and comics as part of your classroom?
Um, Well, I've always been into the arts. My father was a painter. I studied art history as an undergrad. So the idea of looking at visual literacy has always been something that I've kind of incorporated. And looking at, particularly when if you have kids that really struggle with the idea of show, don't tell,
Hmm.
bringing in imagery or images is always helpful in terms of writing. So that's always been kind of a piece. Comics didn't come kind of into my classroom until much later. Well, much later. I've been teaching for I guess maybe almost 30 years now. Um, but really, where it kind of started in terms of graphic literature was picture books.
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
And that's really where I try to kind of sell teachers is comics are just like the natural progression from picture books.
Hmm.
And so for me, that it was a natural way to kind of the way I approach picture books and talking about picture books is very much about visual thinking and visual literacy. And so if we're doing that with the littles and the younger kids, then why aren't we doing it with the older kids?
Hmm.
And it's part of NCTE standards. It's been part of the standards since 1994. So this shouldn't be really much new. Um, and that's really where I start with faculty and other teachers is like, look, this is something we can do and we should be doing. Um, and you can start very, very small with just asking kids, what do you notice? Why do you say that?
Yeah.
What else do you see? And start really basic to bring out those thinking skills. And that's kind of where I started was by bringing in picture books into my classroom and then reading more and more comics and going, oh, well, these are just a more complex version of these. And so let's bring these in. And then
Yeah.
using them as a writing um, tool, right? So another medium for having kids express what they know and communicate what they know. And then it just blew up from there. And so now I use it for a lot of different things because there's such a rich medium
Hmm.
that you can do it for so many activities. I have a great activity that I use for kind of looking at bias um, and kind of digging in and looking at images and shapes and colors and in a book called Little Red Wolf and talking about how we use images for bias, and then translating that into media literacy, and then translating that into words, right? So how does that then translate into the words we choose? And so you can use it for so many different things. And it's a great and uh, entry point, but it's also so engaging that the
Mhm.
kids kind of latch onto it. And so I love kind of bringing it in and I use it throughout my curriculum. It's not an add-on, it's part of what I do. I use it in poetry. I mean, there's just so many openings for comics in the curriculum that I'm always finding something new every year.
Mhm.
And we have so many great books coming out from so many creators that, we just like it just keeps growing and growing and growing. And so I love it. It's just such a gift that keeps on giving in terms of a medium.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I don't know about you, but one of the questions that I get very often is, do you have pushback or do you have stories of that? So I'm going to go in the opposite direction and say, do you have a story where there's a class or maybe a student and it was like the thing that connected?
Oh, I have a bunch of stories. But one of my favorite stories is we had a number of international students join us as I teach at a private school in eighth grade, which I can't imagine sending my eighth grader from China all the way to United States for school, but it happens because they want their child to have an American college education. So they send them early to get that advantage. And I had a student who would have been awkward. I mean, in China, is just one of those kids.
Mhm.
And so a couple of things happened. One, I was teaching American born Chinese
Mhm.
at the
Mhm.
time. It was part of the normal curriculum. Identity was a big theme in our eighth grade curriculum. And so I was able to leverage for both of my Chinese students the Journey West and the Monkey King. So, because it was early in the semester, so this particular student's English was not particularly proficient. So I was able to have her present on the Monkey King, which is um, a it's a rite of passage. I mean, like
Mhm.
everything, like part of being a kid is knowing about the Monkey King. It's a childhood story. And so putting her in a position where she was the expert um, was really helpful in terms of for her self-esteem. And she knew more than we did about the journey west and could pick apart things that we didn't necessarily notice
Mhm.
or understand in terms of allusions in the book. The other thing that was really remarkable, and I actually was on a panel with Raina Telgemeier and actually was able to tell her this.
Mhm.
80 learned how to be an American middle schooler because of Raina Telgemeier,
Wow.
because she could read her books, right? She could see the interactions and read, right? Body language and
Mhm.
be able to pick up on social cues that she wouldn't have been able to pick up while she was also working on vocabulary in a print text. So having the combination, right, of the visual storytelling and right the text helped her learn right how to interact, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And right? A middle school, which is like such a dangerous minefield as it is already, right? And
True,
add that
true.
language barrier and that awkwardness on top of it was amazing. Like I still get like goose pimples thinking about it. Um, it was amazing. And so for her, and she was voracious, like she read everything. And then I could give her like books too, right, to latch like so oh my gosh, what is it? There's a number of memoirs, Life of Little Duck,
Mhm.
about growing
Mhm.
up in China. Right. So I could give her some books too, and like, hey, how accurate is this? Right? What do you think of this? And so I could also try to make that connection with her
Yeah.
as her a teacher. too, right? And again, right, make those connections with her expertise while she was also working on her English, because that's really important too, right? Is to get her talking
Hmm.
to
Hmm.
me and developing that trust. And so that was amazing. And and I actually, so this was a while ago because she's actually a college student and she wants to be a teacher.
Oh, awesome.
um I
Awesome.
actually got a social media message from her. And yeah, I mean, so being able, right, to read those social cues was so important.
Hmm.
um and so that's, I mean, that's one. And then I had another, I taught a graphic novel class for juniors, and I taught juniors that year. I taught American literature, and we had first trimester, and then we had the elective second trimester, and then we came back. And that was interesting because I had predominantly boys,
Hmm.
non-readers, to gifted readers, but to see the difference in the readers going into third term, we started
Hmm.
with Gadsby, to see their ability to dig in to the symbolism in Gadsby after having my graphic novel class was profound. Um, and that was, I mean, that was amazing. I probably should have written about it because it was so cool to see that anecdotal evidence,
Hmm.
right? That we always kind of like talk about and say, oh yeah, yeah, this is one of the benefits of reading comics, but to actually see it like for real as an English teacher having these kids um for the full year was really cool. And like they saw it. And that
Yeah.
was the other piece, right? Is they recognize like, whoa, like, did you catch that, Mrs. Gerber? And like, yeah, I did, Um, that was really cool to see too. And a lot of them took it because they liked manga and all this other stuff, but they also, wrote research paper or analytic papers, and it was a rich class. It wasn't like
Mhm.
they thought they were just reading comics and like, nope, we're gonna dig in. Um, so there's like those kind of stories. It also allows kids to show their strengths, right? You get those
Yeah.
artists. It's also a great tool for collaboration, right? And that's one of
Hmm.
those skills now that we're talking about all the time, right? Well, like, I guess we call them 21st century skills, but
Hmm.
that's kind of
Hmm.
getting now, where you can position kids, right, for a collaborative exercise and take a writer and an artist and put them together, right?
Yeah.
And have them collaborate on a piece. And so there's a real life, collaborative exercise. So those are pieces that I really like to kind of throw kids together and say, okay, well, figure it out.
Yeah.
Or somebody write a script and then take it to a different class and say, okay, can you draw this? And if
Hmm.
you can't, right, then it's not written well enough. And then
Yeah.
go back, right? And that's the essence of good writing and thinking. Is it clear?
Hmm.
And comics can draw that out. Um,
Yeah.
and so there's so many rich tools with comics that I think, when you start looking at it as a teacher and you only think about it as, well, comics are good for reluctant readers.
Hmm.
I think
Hmm.
you sell the medium short.
Yeah.
Um, and if you only teach it like and you just hand the kids a book, I think you sell the medium short too. And I want to kind of encourage teachers to dig into the medium, right? And
Hmm.
to dig into, some of the great books out there that teach you how to read comics. Because I think that's also the beauty in the medium is when you start digging in and like really thinking about what the artists and the writers are doing,
Hmm.
then you that's where you start seeing, the magic. Where, if you just hand a book to the kids, I don't think they get the full benefit of the comic.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's part of that conversation. that comes with the book. And I'm teaching Superman Birthright in one of my classes right now, and we had the conversation about how it's a Moses story in many ways. And today we were looking at two panels that I just kind of sped by, but then looking back at them, it's like, oh, well, this one leads into this one because this is a match on action. And all of those little pieces of visual grammar and foreshadowing, there really is so much to dig into.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you don't like stop and have that conversation or that pause, right?
Hmm.
It just zips by. And I think that I think that's something that because of, you know, so much of technology we're missing out on.
Yeah.
And so that's also the beauty of graphic novels, right? Is we can slow that pace down in a way that's a little bit different than prose, right? It's
Hmm.
not as scary for a
Yeah.
lot of kids. Like going, oh, I don't want to slow down this book. Um, or you can take a panel or you can take a page and slow it down or just pull one piece of it out. When I do my adaptations of a prose novel, we only look at a chapter. I do three different adaptations that I have the kids look at that are very different. So I take a piece of verse, I take Anne Frank's diary, and then I look at To Build a Fire.
Hmm.
And I just take set chunks so that they can match up the original with the graphic adaptation. And I purposely take different kinds of writing because the book clubs they're in have all different types of writing. So, and I only do set chunks so that it's manageable. But then we do a deep dive into the decision making that goes into
Hmm.
all three pieces and what works, what doesn't work. And there are great conversations. And then, all right, well, what did you like and what are you going to steal? I talk about stealing all the time, right? For your own adaptation.
Yeah.
And that's like then you get these really amazing pieces because then they're starting to pick up on the symbolism, the pacing, all of these really neat decisions, right, that the artists and the creators made in those adaptations that could work for their stories. And I'm really picky with my adaptations, so that's why I kind of only choose a few, because it's tricky to do adaptations well.
True.
And I
Very true.
publishers don't always spend enough money on adaptations. Um, but the kids love it. I mean, they really get into it. Um, Particularly if you can get like really good ones. A Long Way Down is one that I really
Mm.
like.
Hmm.
Um, and it's beautiful and the kids really like the bag with the happy face and um
Yeah.
and all of those little pieces and all those little choices. And then you're like, oh well, why would you add that? um and those are the questions, right? Those are the critical thinking that we
Hmm.
want kids to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Now, I was going to ask you about something called perceptive gaze as well,
Yeah.
because this is a resource that you've created that is out there. And so, anything that you'd like to share about how that resource has come to be and where people can find it?
Yeah, so it's perceptivegaze.com. It is something that I started with a friend of mine, Shel Talersky Reese, who is this amazing librarian. And it's all about visual literacy and graphic literature. So it's got a lot of different things in it from her work on things like how to do a mock Caldecott,
Mm-hmm.
to some of examples of the work I do in my classroom. So it's like sneak peeks of different projects and things like that, resources. Um, just sometimes it's what's in my kids' backpacks in terms of the class and what my kids are into. A lot of it's just kind of trying to look at visual thinking and what resources we look at. We really try to kind of look at Philip Yenewine's work as
Hmm.
kind of our basis. of how we approach everything. And so, how can you take that concept of visual thinking strategies into your classroom or into your library, and apply it in lots of different ways? And so, they're just fairly short, kind of blog posts, and it's just kind of our musings and what's going on in our library or classroom space. Um, yeah, so it's been kind of fun. She's a friend of mine from college, and we kind of reconnected and just kind of put things together, and periodically we'll get together in her cabin in the middle of the woods in Ohio, and um kind of peruse and get geeky over comics. So
Nice, nice. I love it. If I'm a teacher out there and I'm like, yeah, but I've got bus duty and I've got lunch duty and I've got bathroom duty and I have four preps and it's a busy world and a busy time and teaching is incredibly busy for listeners that don't know, and sending love for those that do know from firsthand experience. What would be kind of an initial first step into building some comics pedagogy?
it's a good question. In terms of pedagogy, well, I mean, I think, the classic is, well, I mean, there's so many good books. I mean, you've
Yeah.
had like Tim Smith on. I like Dr. Monen's work.
Hmm.
Uh,
Hmm.
I mean, there's, Scott McCloud is obviously the Bible.
Hmm.
And there's lots of great like videos too. I'm a big proponent of like just those are really short, like and Scott's got some really great short videos that you
Hmm.
can watch and a TED Talk that I've even used in my classroom. So there's pieces like that where you can kind of get a really easy, quick kind of primer. And there's also oh my gosh, Comic Book Legal Defense Fund
Yeah.
has
Yeah.
raising a reader. And so there's even little like they have resources that talks about comics in terms of how to read a comic. That's really basic, but it's a good starting point. Um, if you want to look at like creating comics with your kids, Linda Berry's
Hmm.
um,
Hmm.
work is amazing. And like I have all of her books, and I'll pull them in for like my creative writing classes. If you're running a creative writing elective, like definitely get her stuff because she's got like these really great activities that are a lot of fun to just like throw in. Um, and so her curriculum, because really her Make Comics is a curriculum
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
you can kind of pull together. But a lot of it is, for me, is just like dig in, just grab some books, start reading and enjoying the books. Talk to your kids about what they're reading and
Yeah.
what they like. Um, they're some of the best kids. I mean, that's where I started. Like, I have never been really much of a manga fan
Uh-huh.
until like my students, right, started saying, here, you got to read this, or my son also, and like, here, read this, read that. And so from their recommendations, now I started to kind of get more into it. um and then in terms of making comics with your kids, like a basic zine, and there's tons of materials out there for zines. And I have a blog post on making zines. Um, those are really simple ways because they're so compact and short. That's a
Hmm.
really easy activity to do with kids. Um, and if they can explain something in a zine, then they know it. And that's one of the things I really like about comics too, is if they can create something and explain, like, I don't know, the process of how a plant grows in a comic, then they truly understand that process. Um, and they're fun.
Yeah.
Um, so those are some pieces. But there's so many great books out now. It's
Hmm.
crazy. You've got one coming out, and I mean,
Oh, well,
uh,
thanks. Thanks.
you know, um, and there's also lots of like short articles.
Hmm.
too. NCTE's got some resources. I mean, I think the big thing too is really think about what you want to do, right? Because
Hmm.
it is a medium, and think about like what is your goal, like anything else, right? Because you need to think about how it fits in, um, right? Because there's a difference between like just doing something to do it,
Hmm.
right? Um, and doing something because it fits in with your curriculum.
Yeah,
And I think that's for me, I would encourage teachers first to start just reading some really good comics and getting
absolutely.
recommendations from their kids. Um, and I think that's important. If, I'm looking at teaching magical realism, I might pick up I Am Alfonso Jones and pull up, you know, pieces of that, right?
Hmm.
So I think that's how I look at it. It's a medium, so there are great pieces and books that fit different topics or standards that I want to teach. I don't teach comics just to teach comics.
Yeah,
And I think that's something really important to think. If you're teaching comics just to teach comics because you think it's trendy or cool, I think you're missing the point.
yeah,
And you're not going to be as successful. And you're going to end up like you're just not going to be successful, and you're going to end up probably picking the wrong book.
yeah.
Because there's, there like any, right, any medium, there are
Hmm.
books that have really solid literary merit, and there are others that are fun, right? Call
Hmm.
them the difference between, right, dinner and a snack.
Hmm.
There's some that are, you want to linger over, and there are others that you just enjoy because they're just like they're a treat.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Um, well, final question, unless there's another direction you'd rather take, would be anything that's currently on the reading table that you want to mention?
Yeah, I've actually got a stack of books that I'm really enjoying. I do also have a resource. Like, so one of the things, and when I was at Lion Forge briefly, um, one of the things that I do want to encourage teachers to think about, I think comics could be a really powerful medium for poetry.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
and I don't know if you've heard of Julian Peters.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, up in Canada.
That's such a
His
great book.
stuff,
Yeah.
yeah, his stuff is really good. And so if you're an English teacher, I highly recommend you look into his stuff as a gateway into poetry because so many kids struggle with poetry. This is the hottest book right now in my classroom.
Hmm.
Uh,
Hmm.
Girl Loves Drama Boy. So all my kids are, I have a list long for that. Um, Died over
Ah,
this one. Um, Really, really good. So that's one I've loved is Lunar New Year Love Story. Um, they made a really amazing choice pairing both of these folks up.
uh-huh.
Um, and I'm gonna go back and read it again, but I'm a huge fan of Gene Luen Yang.
Hmm.
So at first I was like, oh, they're pairing him up because I've been dying for some more of his original work because American Born Chinese, like I've taught it for a long time. It's one of my favorite books of all time. Um, but this is an amazing duo. I really hope they pair the two of them again. It's a really good match. I love memoirs in all mediums, and so Monstrous has been one of my
Yes.
favorites to come out in a long time.
Uh-huh.
Um, so that's a friendly one. And then for anybody who's a horror fan, Emily Carroll is one of my favorite creators in horror. I mean, I love Colin Bunn, but
Hmm.
Emily's art I just can't get enough of. So I was really excited when something new came out from Erin. Or Emily, excuse me, not Erin, Emily Carroll. So and Guessing House is really, really special. So those are some of mine, but I read a lot.
Yeah,
My
me too.
kids freak out at how much I read. Um, but no, so those are four of mine, although Monstrous is not particularly new, but I love pushing that book because it's so good.
Oh yes, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Um, I connected with Sarah Meyer before they worked on that book, and to see that book, to see Monstrous come into existence, uh, after seeing the work that they did on Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and some of the other pieces, it's just great. Really, really elevates the medium.
Yeah. And it's an important story. I think that's one of the things I like about memoir is so often and one of the things I love about comics as a medium for memoir is we have so many I have so many kids, you know, being a teacher whose stories aren't being told.
Hmm.
And it's
Hmm.
so wonderful to have a story like this out in the world. Um, and I have kids, right, that this resonates with. And so it's awesome. It's awesome to have it in the
Absolutely,
world and particularly told so well. Um, and I'm just glad. I can't wait to see what she comes up with next, or they
absolutely.
come up with next. Yeah. How about you? What are you reading right now?
Oh my goodness. I've been taking a trip through these are not for the kids, I should say that. Of course, Superman Birthright I am teaching for high school, but I've been rereading Jeremy Hahn's The Beauty, which is really, really interesting stuff. And then I'm constantly on sort of this cycle of kind of exploring some of the comics from my youth too. I feel like that's part of my reading cycle. So I continue to do that. And I'm working on a book where I kind of pull those in and talk about them and talk about some of the meaning they have. So lots of 80s comics as well.
Oh, neat.
Yeah, yeah.
Can't
Um,
wait to hear more about the book.
yeah, hopefully all of that comes together well, but that's another thing is I'm always writing and processing. So that's part of what I enjoy about it as well. I need to work on my drawing. I would love to work on my drawing and put something together in comics, but we'll see at some point.
Yeah, I try to when my kids are drawing, I try to draw.
Yeah.
So, which is always interesting to kind of model for kids. Um, But one of the things, again, that I pulled out of Linda Berry is right.
Hmm.
Every day during those units, I have them, you know, sketch on an index card. You know, so we get past that fear of perfection. Um,
Absolutely.
and then I think that's a key, right? Is to get past that fear of perfection, just like
That's right.
writing, right?
Absolutely.
Um, which is really hard.
Right now, as we're reading Superman, I'm drawing kind of like a sketch up on the board, and I'm going to be adding to it. So, uh, big fan of doing that as well. And yeah, always defeating the perfectionism as much as possible.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, but it's I mean, it's been neat to kind of like go back and look at all of the different because I save a lot of photographs or digital copies of kids' work. And so every time I tweak a project is to kind of go back and look at like where, you know, projects or ideas started and how they've morphed and the influence of kids too, right?
Mhm.
And their ideas and how things kind of evolve over time. And so that's kind of a neat thing to do, right? And so take pictures of that sketch and how that evolves
Oh yeah,
because that might be something too, right? That morphs into something else, um, you know, down the road. Because I'm a big fan of like even reflecting on, and I'll pull up mentor texts and things for kids, and kind of like, well, hey, you know, this was done by a kid just like you, but like, look at what you could do, right? And think about what you could do to make this different, or put your own voice on it. And it makes it a little bit less intimidating for folks, which is also kind of neat. And there's a number of great resources, right, to use that are just stick figures or really basic
Hmm.
um, images, right, that are symbolic images that kids can look at to create their comics that are, right, simple and not as complex so that they can have the confidence going in. And I thought of another resource too, Molly Bang,
Yeah.
and her Picture This is another great one to use with kids because, again, it's basic shapes, but you can use those to tell a story too.
Hmm.
And it helps kids, again, get past this idea of realism in comics um, so that they can see that representation can work and still, tell a story. Because I think that's a real hurdle for some kids, the whole idea of I'm not an artist.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
adult.
True, true, true. I should just go ahead and draw. That's what I should do. Um,
Well,
well,
as you can tell, I could talk about this all day long. So I know we got to wrap up.
well, no, no, you're fine. And glad to talk comics and teaching anytime, all about the literacy things. And as I said, I've traveled and kind of seen your work for some time. So glad to connect and feature you on the
Yeah.
show. And may the conversation continue. I'd be glad to have you back for a follow-up chat to check in on what you're doing and what you're reading.
Yeah. Anytime. And I'm excited about your book.
Well, thank you.
Um,
Thank you.
can't
It'll be
wait.
nice to have
Uh,
that.
Yes, well, and I'm also enjoying like your perspective on comics too. So keep it up. I like when people bring up and think about comics in different ways.
Mm,
Um, and looking at it as more than just for, reluctant readers because it's so much more powerful of a medium than just that. Teachers are always flabbergasted when I let them know that there are comics courses, at MIT and
hmm.
things like
Absolutely.
they couldn't possibly be, right? But actually there are. So keep it up. I really enjoy what you're writing about and keep sharing it too because it makes it easy for me to find it.
Well, thank
Because
you.
yes,
Thank you.
teachers are very busy.
Well, I appreciate that. I appreciate the kind words and glad to put some good stories out there and some hopefully helpful ideas for people. So, yeah, definitely. Let's plan another chat at some point soon.
Sounds great.
All
Have
right.
a good night.
You too. Thanks so much.